Great. Welcome to the Munk debates. For the next hour, we're going to be interviewing our debaters. We're starting tonight with Glenn Greenwald, one of our featured presenters. He's arguing against the resolution. Be it resolved, state surveillance is a legitimate defense of our freedoms. Glenn, terrific that you're here because you're essential to this debate. And in fact, you, Edward Snowden, your colleague Laura, you've been really at the center of this kind of global conversation. And been a tough one at times over the last 11 months. What's the key point that you want to make tonight? I know there's going to be a lot to your argument, but what's the one thing, to a doubter out there who's saying, you know what, maybe state surveillance isn't such a bad thing? What's the one thing that you would kind of push back with?
I think the critical question is, what do we mean by state surveillance? And if there were a system that targeted specific people for whom there was credible evidence that they were engaged in plotting terrorist attacks or other violent or criminal activities, there is nobody who would dispute the validity of the state's surveillance over those people. There'd be no debate, there would be nothing to talk about. Unfortunately for the world, that has almost nothing to do with what the actual system of state surveillance is that has been implemented, which is not at all targeted or discriminating, but instead is indiscriminate and suspicionless, where they put not terrorists or other threats to national security under a surveillance microscope, but entire populations, hundreds of millions of people without regard to whether they've done anything wrong. And it's the ubiquity of this system, the indiscriminate nature of it, that makes it so menacing.
But what do you think of the argument, those who say, look, if you want to find a needle in the haystack, you need the whole haystack. It's great to think, let's target one terrorist, but if we want to find out who that terrorist talked to and maybe who the person the terrorist talked to, well, bulk collection is the way to go.
Well, first of all, we don't accept that thinking in any other context. So if you were to say to people, we want to put monitors in your homes that watch what you're doing at all times simply because we want to find the people who are committing crimes, people would instinctively understand why that is repellent. You should watch the people who are actually criminals, but not us. We don't accept that thinking in any other way. The other thing that I would say about it is that it assumes rather falsely that it's efficient to find terrorists by monitoring everybody. The exact opposite is true. If you're collecting billions of emails and telephone calls every single day, which is what the NSA and its partners are doing, it becomes almost impossible to find out who is actually plotting the terrorist attack on the Boston Marathon or who wants to detonate a bomb over an airplane, because you've collected information not about people who are radical or associated with terrorist organizations, but everybody. So it's completely inefficient. And the other thing about it is, terrorism is the pretext and not the real reason for the surveillance system. We've exposed things like spying on Brazilian oil companies or economic conferences that are conducted regionally, or all sorts of democratically elected governments that have nothing to do with terrorism. Terrorism is the excuse that the United States uses for almost everything it wants to do, and is the excuse it uses for this system of mass surveillance as well.
Now, some of your critics at the NSA, in other words, otherwhere, would say that you're conflating collection with surveillance. And when they're doing surveillance, it's really down to, the thin end of the shoe. Once they've sifted through all this data to a few people who they think are legitimate suspects, those people, maybe you would agree also, are kind of bad guys, and maybe the government should have a closer look at them. Do you think that there's a distinction there that needs to be made of collection versus surveillance?
Well, first of all, when the government stores the list of people with whom you're communicating, or it stores your emails, or records your telephone conversations, that is surveillance in every sense of the word. And the reason that's true is because once it's in that system, anyone who has access to that system, the tens of thousands of employees and analysts who work both for the US government and private contractors, have the ability to access it with virtually no oversight or supervision. Secondly, history proves nothing if it doesn't prove that when you allow the government to collect that amount of information, that inevitably it will be abused. People who the United States government perceives as being threats to national security are often nothing more than people who are effectively opposing its agenda. Surveillance, when it is in a mass and indiscriminate form, is extraordinarily dangerous, and the idea that, well, we're just collecting and storing it should be of comfort to nobody, because of how many times over and over it's been proven that once it's in the possession of the government, they will abuse it.
You've written that in addition to threatening privacy in America, you think the NSA and its programs are really, in a sense, out to destroy privacy as a global norm. Can you unpack that for us and what you think the consequences are?
The phrase of the NSA is a very simple one, but a very important one because it conveys what it is that they're doing. The phrase is collect it all. They literally have as their institutional objective the collection and storage of every single form of communication that takes place by and between human beings electronically. They want literally to eliminate the concept of privacy around the world by making every conversation and every electronic action susceptible to their surveillance net. It isn't just spying on Americans, it's spying indiscriminately on the entire world so that the internet, which was once such a promise of liberation and democratization and liberalization, instead becomes the greatest tool of human coercion and suppression ever known to humanity. That is literally the goal of the NSA and one that they're increasingly close to fulfilling.
How do you respond to those who say, look, it's 2014, in the United States you're using a constitution written in the 18th century to define privacy. Our privacy expectations need to catch up to today, and by implication, maybe we should be more comfortable about sharing our data with government if we believe that makes us safer individually and safer collectively.
Well, I mean, a lot of these debates are actually quite old, even though we have them periodically and feel as though they're new. One of the principal motivations for why the former subjects of the British Crown, now known as Americans, waged an incredibly risky revolution, one of their principal grievances was the concept of general warrants, the idea that the king could order entire communities subject to search and seizure by the state, that the state would enter homes, would search for documents or for other objects in search of some dangerous criminal who was a fugitive. And what the colonialists said was, we believe it's completely legitimate to get individual search warrants and prove that somebody has committed a crime and then search them that way, but we vehemently resist the idea that generalized searches without suspicion are in any way a proper function of the state, even though we know that by putting that limit on the state, lots of people are going to have an easier time committing crimes, dangerous criminals and rapists and child molesters are going to evade capture. The need to have this private realm is of such critical importance to what it means to be a free human that nothing justifies allowing its invasion. And so that principle is every bit as valid now as it was then, with the one exception that privacy and protecting it is actually more imperative now, because the internet is not just a place where we send a letter like a post office or make a call the way we do with a telephone service. The internet is the place where we store all of our data, where we engage in all transactions, where we read and form who we are. That really reveals the innermost workings of our mind and our thoughts. And so to convert that kind of a venue, such a comprehensive venue of culture and thinking and individual exploration, into a place of comprehensive surveillance is, I'd say, infinitely more dangerous than any of the prior controversies over surveillance in the past.
Where do you think this debate's going to go? You're sitting on a treasure trove of documents. A small percentage, really, of the total has been released. Do you think this debate is going to burn itself out before we get to major reforms? Your own President Barack Obama seems to be, soft-shoeing the idea of more substantial privacy reforms and reining in entities like the NSA.
I mean, for me, I feel as though the interest in this story globally is as high and as intense as it was after the first week of our revelations, because the revelations have continued, and I don't think the outrage and shock over the disclosures have in any way been diluted, even in the United States, let alone the rest of the world. And often the best bellwether of where public opinion at is the behavior of politicians because of how craven they are. And just a month and a half ago, President Obama himself, after repeatedly defending the metadata bulk collection program in the United States, came out and called for its ending, for its termination, said the U.S. government should not be in the business of collecting this data in bulk. And so I think what you see there...
But now the telcos will hold it for the government.
Well, even there, I mean, there's a question about whether or not they will. I mean, he wants to end the practice of having the government not only possess it, but have access to it, except in very specific cases. And I think the reason you see that, and you see Senate campaigns being constructed around the need to place limits on the NSA, is precisely because there is this lingering public awareness that's actually quite acute, that there is this menace that has been imposed onto something we thought was this free realm, which was the internet. And so, no, I don't think that that the public interest in the stories are burning out. I think there's a lot of stories to come that will intensify that public interest in Canada, in the US, and around the world. And I'm extremely optimistic about the ability to sustain the interest level because of how important the internet has become to people's lives.
And just finally, how is Edward Snowden? What's his state of mind? What does he think is in his future? Does he have any anticipation of returning to the United States?
I mean, in general, he's doing great. You know, when we were in Hong Kong working on these stories, our working assumption that we didn't really have much doubt about was that sooner rather than later, he was going to end up in the custody of the United States government and be put into a cage and probably spend the next several decades in that cage as punishment for the disclosures that he brought, which is what made what he did so courageous. So the fact that he's able to essentially be free and to participate in the debate which he helped to trigger, and to see the amount of support for him around the world, where he really is considered a hero by hundreds of millions of people, and to see the reform that's underway is incredibly gratifying to him. So he's very fulfilled, he's very happy. I don't think he knows exactly what his future holds, but he knew that that would be the case when he made the choice to bring this all to the public light.
And you're adamant that he is not an instrument of an agenda of another intelligence agency.
The idea is ludicrous. You know, he is somebody who literally risked his entire life to bring an end to mass surveillance. The idea that he would be operating on behalf of some foreign government to increase their own surveillance capabilities is absurd, and the people who make that accusation make it without a shred of evidence, and so it's something that ought not to even be taken seriously.
Well, Glenn, we really look forward to the debate tonight, and viewers, we're going to be showing the debate on your terrific new website, part of theintercept.com. And Glenn, it's going to be a fabulous conversation. It's great to have you here in Toronto.
Looking forward to it. Great
Thanks
to be
for
here.
coming
Thank
out.
you very much.
Everybody, stay tuned. We're going to be back in a matter of minutes with Alexis Ohanian, co-founder of Reddit, Glenn's debating partner. He's going to share with us his thoughts on the debate tonight. So stay tuned for that, just moments away. Thank you.